Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about integrating quotes. And when I say integrate, integrate means to basically make the quote feel as if it's just a normal piece of the writing. Obviously you want the quote to stand out, but you want it to kind of just smoothly transition in and smoothly transition out. And I know that's something you noticed when we looked at the two model responses last week. So there are three basic rules, or three basic steps you want to take. The first is to introduce the evidence. Okay, so let people know where they are in the story or any important background information. The second is we have to be able to cite the evidence. So where did you find this? What page number? If I wanted to know more about it, where could I go? And the third is to paraphrase and explain the evidence. So put the evidence into your own words. Why did you choose this piece of evidence? And really use your close reading to show us what it means and what you notice. Is the writer doing something important? Is the writer doing something intentional? What are you seeing there? This part right here, being able to really paraphrase and explain the quotes that you've selected, gives you such credibility with the readers because it shows your readers, I know what I'm talking about and I've thought about this a lot. So the first step, introduce the evidence. Let me give you an example of one that you thought worked really well. So here's the introduction of the evidence in the Model B paragraph we read last week. It says, early in Stave 1, we met Mr. Scrooge while he's working with his only friend, Money, in his counting house. And instantly the narrator reveals that it's not just the December weather that can give you frostbite. And then the quote comes in. I highlighted this in blue because I wanted you guys to see there's a transition, so we know where we are in the story. The other thing is, before I bring in the quote, right here, there's the writer in this red and underlined part also previews the basic idea or the main idea of what's going to come ahead in the quote. Here's an example of one that didn't work quite as well. And you guys were saying how this seemed kind of choppy because it just says a piece of evidence to support this is on page 3 of A Christmas Carol. And then it just goes. When we look at that, a couple things you want to realize. What's important to note? So what's important to remember about this? And when I think about this, somewhere up here we have to mention that Scrooge and his nephew are talking. We have to mention that they're disagreeing about Christmas. And we also have to let them know that this part is Scrooge's opinion. So just by taking like literally 15 seconds and thinking about what's going on in the story, watch what happens when we look at the revised version. So with that knowledge, I've made these revisions, and I've said, early in Stave 1, Scrooge's nephew visits him at the counting house with an invitation to Christmas dinner. Okay? Check. Now we know where we are. The two quickly begin to argue about the value and purpose of the holiday season on page 3, and it doesn't take long for Scrooge to reveal just how miserable he can be. So then we know exactly what's going on. We know that Scrooge is talking. We know it's a dialogue with his nephew. And we know that he's about to show that he's kind of a nasty old cranky guy. Next piece to talk about is citing the evidence. And citing basically means saying where you got it from. You always have to cite your sources, and that's just how you become a credible writer. So if you're quoting something someone said, use the regular quotation marks and then like the mini quotation mark or like the apostrophe mark. So here's the example here. This is a quote from page 6 where Scrooge says if they would rather die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. And you'll notice wherever a character is saying something, there's the small quotes, and then the whole thing is offset in the big quotes. Next important part when citing evidence is page numbers. So unless you mention the page numbers before using a quote, always include the page numbers after the quotation marks but before the end punctuation. So here's an example. In this case, this is from Model A, because it says page 3 before the quote, we don't have to say page 3 in parentheses at the end. However, if we look at this one, at the end of this, I haven't mentioned the page number here, so at the very end I put parentheses, 2, end parentheses, and period. The punctuation comes at the very end. So remember that distinction between the two. Last one we're going to hit pretty heavy is the paraphrasing and explaining of the evidence. And again, this is a year-long skill. and we're in the growth mindset, which means we're about getting better at it each and every time. So here's the paraphrasing explanation from the Model A paragraph that we read last week. And one of the things that you guys noted about it is the writer did a really good job of explaining the quote, of not just leaving the quote hanging, but by summarizing and paraphrasing what it said. And that's the part that I put in green here. And this part in green really does, I think, a pretty solid job of describing and paraphrasing in the writer's own words what that quote actually means. And it shows me as a reader they know what they're talking about. And then in this blue part, it explains how it relates back to the claim. So in this part right here where it talks about, he even goes as far to say that those who aren't happy and merry should die, which further emphasizes that Scrooge is a miserable, lonely old man who cares only about himself. And that really ties home and brings it back up to the idea of what the narrator thinks about Scrooge. Let's take a look at one that wasn't quite as successful. So, in this one, the quote works. I think the quote works pretty well. But what's not working here is at the end I just say, this shows that the narrator thinks that Scrooge is a mean, emotionless person who prefers solitude and isolation instead of warmth and cheer. I haven't proven anything, really. The writer here is just saying, just believe me. I think it shows that, right? We want to be able to back it up, and we want to be able to really use our close reading skills to slow it down and expand on this. So, a couple of things come to mind. One, what does this quote mean? When I think about it, somewhere up here I have to mention as a follow-up that Scrooge is unaffected by the bitterly cold weather. So that part has to become clear in my paraphrasing. And in my explanation, one of the things that I noticed is that there's a lot of hyperbole or exaggeration going on. And this exaggeration, which I should put somewhere down here at the end of this paragraph, shows that Scrooge operates in isolation. And this idea of his own low temperature is really important because it shows us that he shuts out the world. So here's a look at the revised version. So after thinking about it and really taking my time with it, I've come to this part. And I've added after the quote, Scrooge is unaffected by bitterly cold weather, which creates the strong image of a man who chooses to be distant and uninfluenced by his surroundings. So in that sentence, I've been able to paraphrase what's going on there and basically, in my own words, say this is what's happening. And then I take it to the next level here with all that stuff, all my close reading skills, and I look at the patterns of words, and I look at what the writer does to make me feel a certain way. And I've added, although it's highly unlikely that Scrooge was actually able to have his own low temperature. Dickens uses this example of hyperbole to emphasize that Scrooge is on his own, and isn't impacted by normal feelings and emotion. In addition, the pattern of word choice describing extreme temperatures has a chilling impact on readers. This further highlights that Scrooge is a mean, detached person who prefers solitude and isolation instead of warmth and cheer. So, a couple things I want to point out here. Although, in addition, are great examples of transitions that help you to move along your piece and connect all of your ideas. Also, while I was revising this, I got caught up with being kind of repetitive with my word choice, so I used an online thesaurus. And that's where I came up with words like distant, and uninfluenced, and impacted, and detached. So it's a great resource to take advantage of. Make sure you're comfortable with the words you're replacing it with, but it's always good to just jog your memory of other words that could mean a similar definition to the word you might be repeating too much. So, just to review, don't forget about back here, the 3 steps to using evidence. We want to introduce, we want to cite, and we want to paraphrase. If you have any questions, let me know. Good luck, and I look forward to reading your revised responses.